Hi, this is Justin Colletti. You may know me from Sonic Scoop, but today I'm in the Plugin Alliance channel, and we're going to be talking all about the MBC, the latest compressor from Plugin Alliance and Lindell Audio. A little while back, I did a demonstration walkthrough of the SBC compressor from Lindell Audio. That one is a stereo bus compressor based on the iconic classic API 2500 style of compressor, really exacting emulation of those super great compressors that have been heard across all sorts of popular genres. And this new MBC is a multi-band compressor based on the same theme. You've got 3 bands of this classic iconic style of VCA compressor, which is just part of the sound of modern music production. And now you get inside your DAW in multi-band form. We're going to talk a little bit about what makes this specific compressor unique, why it's interesting, but also how and why you'd use this style of multiband compressor instead of another, and why and how you'd use multiband compression at all. So we're going to go into a few audio examples that I think are going to be a lot of fun. I've got a great track here pulled up from a band called Pseutopia, and we've got some stems here to work with so we can dive deep and listen to it on mix bus, on drums, on bass, and on vocals, some of the most common applications for multiband compression. Let's hear it. I've got to say just right off the bat that I had a lot of fun using this one. It is really hard to make it sound bad in general. Just in its factory default settings, it sounded really cool on so many instruments, and it's got a bunch of really useful presets in here as well. Don't take my word for it, we'll hear it together, but the best thing you can do is hear it for yourself. Go over to plugin-alliance.com where you can try out this or anything else they make for free for 2 weeks. Or if you're a member of the Mega subscription bundle, this is going to be yet another free plugin that's added on at no additional charge as part of your Mega subscription. And that's where you're going to get the earliest access to new plugins like this one as well. All right, before going any more into my tasting notes, some concepts on how to use this thing, let's go and look at the individual controls so you got a good sense for the layout and what's going on inside this plugin and exactly what each of the controls does. I have the MBC opened up right here in front of me, and it is a 3-band multiband compressor with low, mid, and high bands. Each of them has its own set of controls independent to that band. You can turn each band on or off with this in button, or solo each band so you can hear just what's going on in that individual band. There is a threshold control for each of the bands, as well as independent attack, ratio, and release controls for each band. And then one of the unique features here is this link control. So you can have your left and right channels completely linked, completely unlinked, or somewhere in between. On this low frequency band, we also have a high pass filter, so we can keep the lowest frequencies out of the detector circuit for our low frequency band. One last interesting control that you have on each of these bands is this MS button. By default, each band operates in stereo mode, but if you click this button once, any of these compression bands can go into mid mode, compressing only the mid part of the signal, or click it again and you're in side mode, so this band is only compressing the sides. Down at the bottom is where you actually control the crossover frequencies for this compressor. By default here in the factory defaults, it's set up to 200 hertz crossover and 5K crossover. So our low band is going to be compressing everything 200 hertz and below. Our high band is going to be compressing everything 5,000 hertz and above. And our mid band is going to be compressing everything from 200 to 5K. And of course, you can adjust these up and down to your liking. In addition to these crossover controls, there's also an independent makeup gain for each of the 3 channels, helping you do some tonal reshaping or keeping things in balance after you've applied a lot of compression to one given band relative to others. All right, before we get into hearing some audio examples, just a few more controls here on the right side are global controls like this VU meter control. By default, it's showing us how much gain reduction we have going on, but if we click it once, we're seeing how much output gain we have. Click it again, and you're seeing how much input gain there is. This tone section is really interesting. You can change the knee between soft, medium, and hard knee. You can also adjust the sidechain filter. Right now it's off, but click this button for a medium sidechain filter in which we're filtering some of the low frequencies out and boosting some of the upper frequencies. Click it one more time and it goes into loud mode, rolling off even more of the lower frequencies and boosting even more of the upper frequencies in the sidechain detector circuit for the compressor. Really uncommon button you're not going to find on a lot of compressors is this style button, which changes between a feedback and a feed-forward mode of operation. Generally speaking, feedback compressors will sound a little bit gentler. What's happening is that the detector circuit for the compressor is getting the already compressed circuit fed back into the detector circuit. So the compressor isn't going to be kind of double compressing or over compressing parts of the audio that have already been compressed. Whereas in feed forward mode, the compression can be maybe a little bit more pronounced, potentially a little bit more aggressive, where the detector circuit on the compressor is only ever seeing uncompressed audio, therefore allowing the compressor to dig in a little bit harder. This output section has a couple handy controls in it. You can take the compressor section in and out. We're still passing signal through the MBC and still benefiting from its tonal emulation of the original hardware. But in addition to being able to turn the compression on and off globally, you also have this complete bypass control, which will bypass the plugin entirely and all the emulated circuitry within it. One more great option here is manual or auto gain. And by factory default, it's actually in this auto gain mode so that there's some global gain compensation going on automatically. So when you apply more compression, the compressor is automatically boosting up the gain. So you don't hear big jumps back and forth in level as you apply more and more compression. Clicking this manual button puts it into manual gain mode, where now we can manually adjust the global makeup gain instead. Finally, there's some fun little toys right here in this bottom right-hand section. There is this mix knob that goes from 100% wet all the way down to 0% wet or anywhere in between. So you can dial in just a little bit of compression or a lot for some parallel processing techniques. We also have this link control here. Click it one time and now all of the controls across each of the bands are linked together. So when you make a change in one band, it'll make it on all of them. Turn it off, and they are acting completely independently. There's also a super fun nuke switch here, which takes the compressor into an overload mode, where you're getting more overdrive, more saturation, more overcompression, some really fun sounds to be had in nuke mode. And if that's not enough for you, there's also this THD control here, where you can add more harmonic distortion to get more saturation and more character out of the compressor, or you can dial it back to make it sound even cleaner than it would by default in the real hardware. And that's it. Those are really all of the controls on the Lindell Audio MBC. So big question here is, how and why would you use a multiband compressor like this one? Why would you use a multiband compressor in general? I'll give you some great examples there, but also why use this style of multiband compressor instead of the other styles of multiband compressors that are out there? You may have seen other multiband compressors that have these super modern digital interfaces that might have 4 bands, 6 bands, even 8 bands or more of multiband compression. And this one is a little simpler and more straightforward than that. And that is actually a feature here. It's just really simple, intuitive operation that helps you do the two things that multiband compressors are, in my opinion, supposed to do. One, help you solve problems, and this can absolutely do that. And two, helps you do tonal reshaping of sounds in some really fun ways. And this definitely helps you do that. And I found it honestly hard to get bad sounds out of this thing. Because of its simple operation and its curated controls, it's kind of always steering you, I feel like, in the right direction. And often just bringing this thing up in its factory default on any number of sources kind of just made them sound more betterer, in my humble opinion. Maybe you'll experience the same thing. But you can dig in and really customize how this thing responds to each sound source. In my opinion, one of the best ways to use multiband compression is somewhat minimally. The reason you might reach for a multiband compressor is that on a particular sound source, you want to compress the lows more than you want to compress the mids and the highs. So we just go in and engage the low band only, perhaps, and leave the other two bands alone, or compress the low band a little bit more than the other two bands. Often with multiband compression, you don't need 4 or 6 or 8 bands. A great example of where you might compress lows more than your mids and highs could be bass, where a lot of great mixers love to split their signal up into multiple parts, often compressing the low frequencies more than they're compressing the mids and the highs. Another great application where you'd compress maybe the mids more than the lows and highs could be something like drum bus, where you want to make sure that you don't have a ton of artifacts from compressing the cymbals, and maybe you don't want the kick drum to be the main thing that's triggering the bus compressor, but you just want to control some of that mid-range boxiness on the drum kit as it gets louder. Maybe you're sucking down on the mids a little bit more than you are on the lows and highs. Or maybe you're compressing a vocal, and to help keep it from being too sibilant, you're doing a little bit of a faster attack on your high frequency band. And in any of these examples, you could be just using one of these bands, or you could be using all three, perhaps with one or two of the bands doing a little bit more aggressive compression than the others. And I think that this overall simple design philosophy helps take you in the direction of being a little bit more minimalistic about what you're doing with multiband compression and thinking about what's really important, what you're really trying to achieve with your multiband compressor. And because of the limited number of options, there's just fewer things to kind of get wrong and mess up your signal. So it helps keep you, I think, from doing multiband compression badly. At least that's the result that I felt like I was able to get out of it more easily than with some more complex multiband compressors. But let's take this out of the realm of the theoretical and start actually hearing this together on some sound sources. I have got a great rock track here called Believe by a great band called Pseutopia. These are actually some mastering clients of mine. Go check them out. We'll have the link in the description down below where you can check out more of their music, and you can hear the actual final master I did for them. But right now we're checking out some stems for this song, Believe, so we could go under the hood and apply multiband compression to some of the most common areas where you're likely to use it. In my opinion, mix bus, drum bus, bass, and vocals. So let's go through some examples real quick here. Starting out right here on the mix bus itself, I pulled this thing up in its basic factory default settings, which are not settings I'd normally think to use on mix bus, and it kind of sounded good anyway. It's got by default an attack time of 1 millisecond, a ratio of 4:1, but it's just such a forgiving sounding compressor that it kind of worked with these settings right out of the gate. Here, let's hear a bit of it in bypass, and then I'll engage the compressor before we go into doing some more custom settings. Let's hear it. So just out of the gate, it kind of works with these default settings, even though they're not traditional mix bus settings. For a track like this, where there's actually already bus compression going on, baked into the mix and baked into these stems, I'd be a little bit more inclined to use a technique that I like to think of as uncompressing, where we're going to bring back some of the transients that were in this track and emphasize the attack a little bit more. So let me go ahead and close this compressor, and I'll open up another version of it that has some slightly different settings on here. Now we've got an attack time of 30 milliseconds. That's going to bring back some of the punch and articulation, really fast release time, and a more gentle ratio of about 2:1. And let's hear before and after with these settings. Oh, it's so easy So I think you can hear with these settings, things just get a little bit more vibrant and they do start to sound a little bit brighter and tighter, in part because the lows are probably being a little bit more contained than the highs. So even though this plugin is doing some automatic level matching for us, it still sounds a little bit louder post compression because things get a little brighter and tighter. And because of that slow attack time, we're starting to feel things like the snare drum just pop out a little bit more and become a little bit more vibrant. And as much as this kind of uncompressing approach, where we're bringing some of the transient emphasis back up, works just fine with a normal stereo bus compressor, with a multiband compressor, I find it works even better still. But some of the really fun things we can do here are going to be even more exaggerated. I'll go ahead and solo just the drum bus. And here I have it in some pretty subtle settings. I've got a really slow attack happening on the low frequencies, a slightly faster but still medium-ish attack, letting a lot of transient and pop through on the mid frequencies, and the high frequencies have a faster attack to help control some of that transient edge on the cymbals. But really the most active band here is going to be the mid-range, allowing us to compress the center frequencies of the drum kit without over-compressing the cymbals and getting a lot of artifacts there, or making it so that the kick drum is the primary thing triggering our compressor. Let's hear a passage of drums over here, first without it and then with. And I think a cool thing that you hear on this one is I'm almost rebalancing the kick and snare drum in this already mixed stereo stem of drums. By having the mid frequencies compress more, I'm kind of sucking that snare down, but letting its initial attack get through with that slow 30 millisecond attack time. And then we're compressing the low frequencies less. So it has this effect of bringing down the snare a little bit, but still keeping it kind of detailed and clear sounding, while kind of bringing up the kick drum a little bit. But of course, these subtle approaches to drum bus compression are not the only thing you can do with a multi-band compressor. We can do really heavy-handed, diabolical parallel compression of drums. Let me take it out to another section here where the drums are doing some more tom-oriented stuff. Let's hear it. First in bypass. This time I have the nuke mode on. And I also switch between some quick different settings I dialed up between A, that has nuke turned off, and B, which has nuke turned on. Let's hear it. First in bypass. So some really savage sounds you can get out of this that are still fun, and then mix them into taste using this wet dry knob. Another one of my favorite applications, though, has got to be bass. So I'm going to bring up yet another version of this on our bass guitar. And on this bass, I'm looking to do something that is a fairly popular approach for a lot of great mixers, which is to split our bass up into multiple frequency bands and compress the low end more significantly than the mids and highs. That way we won't hear too much artifacting and tonal reshaping on the mids and highs, but we'll get a lot of good control over the lows. And I'm giving things a little bit of a smiley face curve here, boosting the lows and the highs a little bit more than boosting the makeup gain on the mids. In this B setting, I have a slightly more minimal approach where we're compressing the lows a lot and compressing the mids and highs just a little bit. And in A, I go even more extreme with this, compressing the lows and the mids a whole bunch, and then boosting more in the highs. Let's hear this before and after. Here's our before. And I think you can hear I can bring a lot more articulation and growl and a little bit of fuzz and edge out of this bass by using this multiband compressor in a way that's a little bit like a compressor, a little bit like an EQ. And this is me adding it on top of an already processed stem, which is a great application for multiband compressors in general. If you're ever doing remixes or masters from stems, you have a lot more control, I find, with a multiband compressor than you do with conventional compressors and even EQs in some cases. If you want, we could hear the same exact kind of approach on this raw, dry version of the stem. And this kind of bass sound can achieve a lot more detail in the mix and help it sound more audible without it taking up too much space. Let's check out one more application here real quick on vocals. And in this case, maybe we'll take a listen to the raw uncompressed vocals first. They're not completely dry, they do have some effects on them. And there's some compression going on, probably from tracking, but not a ton. Let's hear a quick before and after here.
And I forget all I've learned. Bright lights abound, the voices around. Oh, it's so easy to fall in line.
And I think that starts to add a nice bit of polish and consistency to this lead vocal. If we hear this raw lead vocal in the mix, we kind of hear some words too much and others kind of get buried and lost. Let's hear that real quick.
Bright lights abound, the voices around.
You hear how it kind of trails off a little bit on those two phrases? Let's hear it again with the multiband compressor engaged.
Bright lights abound, the voices around. Oh, it's so easy to fall in line.
Cool stuff. I think you hear it start to feel a lot more evened out. But if you're working from stems or working across already treated buses, you can still reshape sounds on an already treated vocal stem with a multiband compressor like this one. Here it is one time on our already significantly compressed vocal stem. Before.
And turn, and I forget all I've learned.
And I think you hear it just gets a little bit tighter sounding when this is engaged because we're just adding a little bit more control, particularly to those lows and mids. One other thing I thought could be fun here, and this might be absolutely crazy, but I'm going to do it anyway, is what would happen if I put an instance of this multiband compressor on every single one of these already processed stems? Will it sound absolutely stupid? And the answer, I think, is surprisingly, no, it sounds kind of cool. This might be a little bit more aggressive than you'd normally do in, say, a mastering context, but you really can safely put this thing on, do a lot of kind of overly aggressive multiband compression, and not have it sound awful, which is a very cool characteristic to have in a compressor. Now, this sounds cool, but you're going to tell me, Justin, no fair, it got a lot louder. I have something for you there. Here's what we'll do. I've got a separate version of the mix bus right here for you, and I'm going to put a limiter on it. So now we're hearing a sum of all the stems just brought up in level with a simple Brainworks True Peak limiter. And now we can hear back and forth a version of this entire mix with way too much MBC on it. Some really quick, simple settings dialed in onto practically every one of the stems, compared to the original, just made louder. Let's hear what that back and forth sounds like. Here's the original down here, and here's the new version. Let's check it out. So pretty cool. That sounds kind of smoking. Is that maybe a little bit too intense, a little bit too overhyped, a little bit too overcooked? Maybe. We're doing a demonstration video here, but it sure was a lot of fun to hear back to back. Go ahead, play around with this, get carried away, do too much with it, and then go ahead and back off a little bit until it sounds like what you want your records to really sound like. But I think you can see here on the screen, these were indeed level matched, but the version that had more of the multi-bus compression on it and a little bit more of the containment of those lows just got a little tighter and more exciting and had even more perceived loudness at the same LUFS level. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this demonstration and walkthrough of the MBC from Lindell Audio and Plugin Alliance. I had a lot of fun playing around with this one, and I want you to have a lot of fun playing around with it too. It's the best thing you can do is go to plugin-alliance.com where you can try out this or anything else that Plugin Alliance makes for free for 2 weeks. Or just go ahead and get the Mega Subscription Bundle. It is one of the biggest steals in the world of pro audio. And if you are a Mega subscriber, you're going to be among the first people to try out new plugins like this when they come out. When you do get to playing around with it, I want to hear from you in the comments down below. Have you tried out this compressor yet? What sources have you liked it on the most? What are some of your favorite tricks with it? We want to hear from you in the comments down below. I read every one of them when they come in. Thanks again for hanging out with me. This has been Justin Colletti of Sonic Scoop, this time on the Plugin Alliance channel. See you next time.